He thought he was surprising his sons. Just a quick visit, a quiet moment. But when he walked into that classroom, he saw something he wasn't ready for. His twin boys were already standing beside someone else. Not a teacher, not family. The maid. She was holding their Mother's Day card, and the way they looked at her changed everything. He had no idea they invited her. And what happened next? He never told anyone. Until now. It wasn't planned. There was no conversation. No hint. Just a moment that changed what he thought he knew. Jonathan Scott was never the forgetful type, especially not today. Mother's Day. His wife, Margaret, died giving birth to the twins. And for 7 years, he did everything he could to make sure they didn't feel that hole too deeply. This year he cleared his meetings, put on the tie she gave him, showed up early at St. Edmund's, a school where image matters and grief is kept polite. He didn't tell the boys he was coming. He just wanted to be there to surprise them, to make the day easier. But when he stepped into the classroom, everything stopped. Laughter, voices, movement, all of it paused. Because there they were, his sons, not looking for him, not holding space beside an empty chair, but standing beside her. Evelyn James, the maid, 28, hired after Margaret's death. She was dressed in something soft, no apron, no clipboard, just a blue dress she probably saved for something else. And in her hand, a red paper heart, their Mother's Day card. Jonathan stood frozen, because the truth hit harder than he expected. They didn't ask him to come. They didn't ask permission. They didn't wait. They chose her. And whatever this moment was, it wasn't a mistake. One of the twins leaned his head on her arm. The other smiled like this was exactly how it was supposed to be. And Evelyn, she looked like someone trying to hold it together. Not because she wanted to be their mother, but because maybe God let her fill a space they didn't know how to name. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, didn't even move. He just watched. And in that moment, everything he thought he was managing so well quietly fell apart. Before we begin Chapter 1, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And I hope this story reminds you of something simple but true. God doesn't always fix the loss, but sometimes He sends someone to sit in the ache with you. And that kind of love, it's never just coincidence. It started with a red paper heart. Not the kind sold in stores, not the perfect kind. The kind a 7-year-old cuts slowly, jagged edges, smudged crayon, bent down the middle from too many folds. In Mrs. Ellison's Year 1 class, the desks were covered in glitter dust and glue sticks, the windows fogged with the breath of children laughing too loud. Everywhere, kids were whispering about Sunday brunch and perfume gifts. They compared cards and asked each other what color their mums would wear. At the back table, John and Kevin Scott worked in silence. Same posture, same serious faces, identical red blazers buttoned to the top. They didn't giggle, they didn't rush, they just folded, carefully. They knew they were supposed to feel something today, but feelings had become tricky in their house. They came in sudden waves, or not at all. Mrs. Ellison passed by and placed a hand gently on Kevin's back. "You boys
John
doing
gave
okay?"
the smallest
nod. Kevin didn't look up. They were used to this, the soft voices, the sideways glances, the well-meaning concern. But they weren't sad. Not exactly. They were waiting for something they couldn't name. That afternoon, while other kids ran to their mums with cards flying in their backpacks, the twins walked slowly down the school steps. The driver waited at the curb in the usual black sedan, but they didn't rush. John held the folded heart like it might rip if the wind touched it. Back home, Evelyn James was finishing the dishes. The house was quiet in the kind of way that felt too big, like the silence stretched into every corner. She didn't mind it. She'd gotten used to the echo of grief. She wore a sweatshirt and house slippers, her hair tied loosely, sleeves damp from rinsing the boys' water bottles. When she heard the door open, she dried her hands, not expecting anything more than snack requests or muddy shoes. But when she turned the corner, she found them standing still in the foyer. Kevin's backpack hung off one shoulder. John was holding something behind his back. He stepped forward, his shoes making no sound on the marble floor. Then, without a word, he handed her the heart. Crayon scrawled across the front in crooked letters, "Will you come?" She blinked. "Come where?" Kevin looked up. "To the Mother's Day tea." Evelyn froze. The moment landed in her chest like something heavy. She looked at the card again, at the boys, at the way Kevin's voice trembled just slightly when he added, "Only if you want to." She didn't speak right away, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she didn't want to say the wrong thing. "I'm not your mum," she said gently. John shrugged. "We know." "But you make the house feel like it used to feel," Kevin whispered. Evelyn felt it then, that sting behind the eyes, the one she'd learned to blink away. She looked down at the card, felt the crease in the middle from John's careful fold, the crayon rubbing off on her thumb. "If the school says it's okay," she said softly, "I'd be honored." She didn't say it with excitement. She said it like a promise, quiet and sacred. They nodded, then walked off toward the living room, as if they hadn't just broken something open. Evelyn stood there alone, holding the heart, and in that moment, and she knew, this wasn't about standing in for someone, this wasn't about pretending, this was about showing up. And when she looked up, she didn't notice the shadow just beyond the hallway, Jonathan Scott, still in his dress shirt, still holding the cufflink he hadn't fastened yet. He had heard only enough to feel it in his chest, and instead of stepping forward, he stepped back. Jonathan didn't ask that night, not about the card, not about the invitation. He came home late, as usual, quietly, the kind of late where you don't check your watch anymore. The townhouse was still. Dinner had already been cleared. The boys were upstairs, their laughter replaced by soft breathing behind closed doors. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, one hand steady, the other holding a folded tea towel. She looked up when he entered, gave a small smile, polite, tired, not forced, but not expecting anything either. "Boys asleep?" he asked. She nodded. "Just now." He reached for a glass from the cabinet, poured water from the fridge. The hum of the appliances filled the silence. There was something in the air, not tension, but the kind of space that forms when something hasn't been said yet. Evelyn didn't bring it up, neither did he. But when she started to leave, he asked, "What was the card?" She turned slowly. "Pardon?" "The one John gave you," he said, not looking up. "I saw it." She hesitated. Her fingers tightened slightly. "They invited me to the Mother's Day tea," she said gently. "No pressure, just a question." His jaw flexed, not with anger, but something closer to discomfort, noticing something too late. "And you said yes?" "I said I'd go if the school allows it." He nodded once. A long pause followed. Then he set the glass down. "They asked the maid to stand in for Margaret," he said flatly. More observation than question, but the words were cold in the air. Evelyn's breath caught. "I didn't ask them to," she said, quiet but steady. "I didn't expect it either. I didn't want to hurt them." Jonathan's face didn't change. He wasn't cruel, but something behind his eyes pulled back. "You know how people are," he muttered. "Parents, the board. That school lives on reputation. This could be misunderstood." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I understand," she said. "I haven't spoken to the school yet. If you'd prefer I don't go—" But he cut in. "It's not about what I prefer." He looked up at her then, for the first time tonight. "It's about how this looks. She was their mother. That space, it doesn't get replaced." Evelyn's voice dropped. "I never thought it did." They stood there still, not in conflict, but in a delicate space between caution and pain. She turned back toward the hallway, then paused. "They're not asking me to be her," she said without looking back. "They're asking someone to stand beside them, just for a day." He didn't answer. The moment passed. The fridge hummed again. She left the kitchen, and Jonathan stood alone, staring at the towel she'd left behind on the counter, folded neatly, one corner slightly frayed. He didn't sleep much that night. When he did, the dreams came back. Margaret's voice in pieces, a laugh cut off mid-sentence, the last time she touched his hand, right before they wheeled her away. He sat up in the dark. No lights, just the city outside, glass buildings glowing like they didn't know what grief was. He got up, walked the hallway like he always did when sleep wouldn't hold, stopped outside the twins' door. He heard them breathing, even soft, safe. Across the hall, a light was still on under the maid's door. He thought about knocking, but he didn't. He just stood there, listening. And somewhere, beneath the discomfort, beneath the walls he'd built around the space Margaret left behind, he felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Gratitude, not loud, not proud, just real. He didn't know what to do with it yet, but it was there, like a crack in the concrete, small, but growing. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day where everything felt normal on the surface. The boys left for school early, backpacks swinging off one shoulder, voices low and tired from a restless night. Jonathan had already left. No words that morning, just the usual note on the counter. Meeting at 10, back by 5. Evelyn moved through the house like always, picking up socks, closing drawers halfway open, rinsing cereal bowls still sticky with milk. She wasn't avoiding the conversation from the night before, but she wasn't chasing it either. Some walls in this house didn't fall from arguing. They cracked in silence. Upstairs, she entered Margaret's old study, now used for storage, boxes stacked against the far wall, an old desk pushed under the window. She didn't go in often, only when the boys needed something from the craft drawer. She knelt to pull it open, but the drawer stuck halfway, caught on something jammed at the back. She tugged once, then again. It gave, and what slipped loose was not glue or ribbon, but a notebook, spiral-bound, faded at the edges, a smudge of jam across the corner. Evelyn paused. It was Margaret's handwriting. She knew it instantly, neat cursive with little flourishes at the ends. She opened it slowly. It wasn't a journal. It was a recipe book, but not one copied from the internet or store-bought. This one was real, messy, alive. Kevin hates the crust. Cut them off. John likes strawberry, not raspberry. Always sing the second verse twice. They fall asleep by then. Evelyn sat back on her heels, breath catching in her throat. Each page held more than instructions. They held reminders, little pieces of a woman trying to hold on. One page was sticky, another had tear marks that dried into the paper, and then she saw it. A line scribbled across the top corner of a blank page. Tell them I love them, when they forget. Her chest tightened. The room felt heavier somehow, like the air was listening. She turned the page and pressed her hand flat against it. Like touching it might bring Margaret back. But Margaret wasn't coming back, and these boys, they were growing up in the echo of a love that hadn't had time to finish its story. Evelyn closed the book gently, sat with it in her lap. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she placed it on the counter downstairs, and that night she made their toast with no crust, strawberry jam, not raspberry. She hummed a tune she didn't know she knew until they started yawning at the exact moment she thought they would. At bedtime, she smoothed their blankets and kissed the tops of their heads. Neither boy asked where she learned those things. They just leaned into her hands and whispered, "Good night." And as she closed the door behind her, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but felt, like grief stretching just enough to make space for someone else to stand beside it. Later that evening, Jonathan came home early, earlier than usual. He loosened his tie as he walked in, pausing when he saw the recipe book on the kitchen counter. He opened it, read the notes, the crumbs between pages, the handwriting he hadn't seen in years. He didn't ask Evelyn why it was out. He didn't have to. He just stood there a moment longer, then went upstairs to the boys' room. They were already asleep. He watched them for a long time. Then, slowly, carefully, he sat down at the edge of Kevin's bed. He reached out, paused, then gently brushed the hair from his son's forehead. His voice came out lower than usual, almost like it didn't want to break the quiet. "I'm sorry I don't know all the songs." Kevin stirred a little, eyes closed. "That's okay," he mumbled. "You don't have to sing." Jonathan nodded. He didn't try again, but he stayed. For the first time in months, he didn't go back to work, didn't check his phone, didn't scroll through emails on the hallway bench. He stayed, in that room, listening to the sound of his son's breathing. And somewhere downstairs, Evelyn turned the last page of the recipe book and whispered, "I'll tell them." The invitation sat on the counter for 2 days, folded, quiet, waiting. No one mentioned it. The boys didn't ask again, and Evelyn didn't bring it up. But every now and then she would catch one of them glancing at it, not touching, not opening, and just looking, like they were hoping it hadn't been forgotten. It was Wednesday afternoon when they asked to rehearse. Evelyn had just pulled a tray of biscuits from the oven, the whole kitchen warm with cinnamon and butter. Kevin stood by the window, holding a rolled-up paper like a microphone. John was sitting on the edge of the couch, his socks mismatched, his face unusually serious. "What if someone says you're not our mum?" Kevin asked quietly. Evelyn paused. The question was innocent, but it landed with a weight. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He just wanted to be ready. Evelyn set down the tray. She walked over, crouched in front of them, eye level now. "Then we say," she said slowly, "she's not. But we asked her to come." John nodded, memorizing it like a line in a play. Kevin twisted the pretend mic in his hands. "What if someone laughs?" Evelyn softened. "They won't." "But what if they do?" She looked at him for a long moment, touched his wrist gently. "Then we stay kind, and we tell the truth." John picked up his toy dinosaur and held it like a guest in the pretend classroom. Kevin cleared his throat. "This is Evelyn," he announced. "She helps us remember." Evelyn smiled, but it trembled. They practiced again, this time with silly voices. John made one of the dinosaurs a teacher with a funny accent. Kevin pretended to offer biscuits to imaginary classmates. Their laughter filled the room. Not loud, not wild, but pure, real. And down the hallway, just out of sight, Jonathan stood still. He'd come down the stairs for coffee, phone in hand, but the sound of Kevin's voice had stopped him mid-step. He didn't mean to listen, but he didn't move. He heard everything. "This is Evelyn. She helps us remember." And Evelyn's reply, "I'm not your mum. Just someone who loves you enough to stand where it hurts." He leaned against the wall, and for a moment he didn't feel like the head of the house, or the man who built a billion-dollar company. He felt like someone who had no idea how to rebuild what was gone. The laughter died down eventually. The boys ran upstairs. Evelyn stayed behind, folding their little blazers, brushing crumbs from the couch. She didn't know he'd been there. Later that evening, as she was wiping the kitchen table, Jonathan walked in. He looked tired. Not in the way sleep fixes, but the kind of tired that starts in the soul. He nodded toward the counter. "The school still hasn't called." Evelyn straightened slightly. "I can follow up in the morning." He hesitated. "If it gets approved," he said slowly, "you'll need something proper to wear. It's a formal event." Evelyn's hand stilled. She wasn't sure if it was permission or warning. "Of course," she said softly. "I have something." Another pause. The air between them was full, not of anger, but of things neither of them knew how to name. He looked down at the floor, then at the card still sitting on the counter. "They really want you there," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "They do." He rubbed the back of his neck, glanced once toward the staircase. "I don't want them to feel confused." "They're not," she replied. "Not about this." He looked at her, really looked this time. She wasn't trying to take anything. That was clear now. She was just there, still standing, still gentle, still saying yes to something that wasn't hers to carry, but she carried it anyway. Jonathan gave a small nod, then left the room. She didn't follow, didn't press. She just stood in the quiet, hands resting on the chair backs, eyes soft with something unspoken. And behind her, the folded card still sat on the counter, unopened, but not forgotten. The morning of the tea arrived grey and quiet. A soft drizzle misted the windows, the kind London kind, not enough to need an umbrella, just enough to blur the glass. The twins were ready before anyone asked them to be. John buttoned Kevin's blazer. Kevin fixed John's hair. They didn't speak much, not out of sadness, but focus. Today mattered, not because it was Mother's Day, but because she said yes. Evelyn stood at the bedroom mirror in a powder blue dress she hadn't worn since her cousin's wedding. It wasn't new, but it felt new today. She kept her hair loose, simple, pressed down the nerves in her chest with soft, steady hands. Downstairs, the twins waited by the door, polished shoes tapping the floor in uneven rhythm. When she stepped into the foyer, they both looked up. Their smiles were small, but full. Kevin held out a tiny flower, pulled from the garden that morning. John held the card, the same one, still folded, still creased. "You look like a memory," John said quietly. Evelyn blinked. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have to. The driver opened the door without comment. They rode in silence. Not heavy silence, the kind that holds something sacred. At St. Edmund's, the reception hall buzzed with light chatter. Linen tablecloths, paper crafts, mums in heels and soft perfume. The room was warm but tight. Every seat claimed, every glance loaded with unspoken comparisons. When Evelyn stepped in, hand with the twins, the room noticed, not with shouting, but with stillness. Some eyes turned, some lips pressed together, others just stared. She felt it, not in her skin, but in her breath. But she didn't stop walking. Neither did they. The teacher smiled warmly. "Kevin, John, we're so happy to have your guest." Guest. Not mother, not mistake. Guest. It was enough. They found their table. The boys climbed into their seats, placing the card carefully in the center. Evelyn smoothed her dress, sat down, folded her hands. She could feel it again, the weight of being seen in a room where she was never meant to belong, not by title, not by dress code, not by the invisible lines that divide people like her from people like them. And then, the door opened. Jonathan stepped in, not rushed, not late, just unannounced. He hadn't said he was coming, not to her, not to the boys. He wore a dark suit, tie slightly askew, eyes already scanning the room before the door had even closed behind him, and when he saw them, the twins and Evelyn at the far table, he stopped, mid-step. Everything slowed. Evelyn met his eyes. Her body froze, not out of shame, but out of not knowing what he would do. The boys turned, lit up. "Dad!" Kevin called. "Come sit." Jonathan didn't answer. He was still watching Evelyn. She stood slowly, unsure. "This is Evelyn," John said, louder now, "to help us remember." And something cracked, not in the room, but in him. The air didn't shift, the music didn't change, but he did. Jonathan stepped forward, walked to the table. His eyes were tired, but present. He looked at Evelyn, at the card, at the two boys he somehow felt farther from than ever. And then, quietly, he clapped. Once, twice. And the room exhaled. It wasn't a speech, wasn't a declaration, just a man letting go of what he couldn't control, long enough to accept what he didn't expect. He pulled out the last chair, sat down beside them. Evelyn blinked back something she didn't want to name. The twins reached for the biscuits. Jonathan poured the tea, and for the first time in 7 years, the table felt full. The photo wasn't planned, but someone took it anyway. A parent, maybe 2 tables over, captured the moment just after Jonathan sat down. The twin boys in blazers, Evelyn in powder blue, a paper heart on the table, and a billionaire father quietly clapping. It wasn't posed, it wasn't dramatic, but it said enough. And by evening the image was already circulating, first in the school's private parent group, then quietly shared, then forwarded, and then judged. Evelyn didn't know about it that night. She was in the kitchen, humming faintly as she wiped down the counter. The boys were upstairs arguing about which dinosaur got the top bunk. Jonathan was in the study, scrolling through emails that felt colder than usual. It wasn't until he opened a message from a board member, short, clipped, that the headline stopped him. Billionaire brings Maid to Mother's Day event. Touching or troubling? He froze. Below it, the photo. Slightly blurred, but clear enough to recognize her, them, him. He kept reading. Sweet or staged? What boundaries exist between help and home? Children deserve structure, not confusion. And then from someone he once considered a friend. This feels performative. Jonathan closed the laptop, stared at the blank wall across the room. He felt the rise of something in his chest, not rage, not shame, something quieter, more dangerous. Doubt. Downstairs, Evelyn hadn't noticed the silence yet. She was still riding the soft high of the day, the way the boys beamed when he walked in, the sound of their laughter clinking against teacups, the surprise of Jonathan's chair pulling out, his presence, not forced, just real. She'd carried that moment all day, until she turned from the sink and found him standing in the kitchen doorway. His face was unreadable. Not cold, just closed. I saw the photo, he said. She blinked. What photo? It's online. Parents are talking. She straightened, put the towel down. He stepped closer. Some think it crossed a line. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She didn't know what line he meant. I didn't ask for it to be public, she said carefully. I didn't even know. I know. His voice was low, controlled, but not angry. Just tired. I should have expected it, he muttered. Should have seen it coming. Evelyn's breath caught. The warmth from earlier faded like breath on glass. I was only there because they asked me. Her voice broke slightly. I didn't go to be seen. I went to show up. Jonathan looked at her then. Not past her, not through her. At her. I know, he said. And yet, the silence that followed, it felt like distance. Later, in her room, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed. The dress hung neatly on the closet door. The flower the twins gave her lay drying on a paper towel by the window. She scrolled through her phone, then stopped. There it was, the post, shared, reposted, captioned. She didn't read all the comments, she couldn't, but one line lingered. Some roles should remain clear. It's dangerous when children forget who's who. She didn't cry. Not then. But she did sit back against the headboard and close her eyes. She'd known this moment might come. People always had opinions about things they didn't understand. But still, it hurt. Not because of the words, but because she didn't know if Jonathan had her back now that the room was empty. Upstairs, the twins were already asleep, but John had left something on his pillow, a folded note. Jonathan saw it when he came in to check on them. He opened it slowly. Crayon. Again. Thank you for clapping. We were scared, but you made it okay. He stared at it for a long time. The noise of the world was still in his head, the whispers, the questions. But this was quiet and true. A child's way of saying, you showed up. He folded the note and tucked it into his pocket, then turned off the light, stood in the doorway for a beat longer than usual. His sons slept soundly, but the world outside had begun to stir. The house was quieter than usual. Not empty, just heavy. After the tea and the post, after the headlines and the strange looks at school drop-off, the world didn't crash. It just cooled, like the warmth had taken a step back. Evelyn kept her rhythm. She still folded the boys' clothes with care, still made toast the way Margaret used to, still placed vitamins on the side of their plates like it mattered, but the softness behind it had dimmed, not because she stopped caring, but because something sacred had been touched by people who didn't understand it. And once that happens, even the air feels different. Jonathan moved slower that week, stayed home more, not in a way that said, I'm present, but in a way that said, I'm trying to understand something I don't know how to say out loud. He watched more than he spoke, noticed the way Kevin leaned into Evelyn when his stomach hurt, how John looked at her for approval before telling a joke. These weren't things she taught them. They were things they trusted her with. And that trust, he hadn't seen it clearly until the world told him he shouldn't. The form came home on Friday, tucked in the twins' homework folder. Evelyn found it on the kitchen counter, a simple white paper with boxes and check marks. School emergency contact update. She scanned the usual fields: parent name, phone number, email, then paused. Under primary guardian if parent is unavailable, a name had already been written: Evelyn James, in pencil, careful letters, child's handwriting. The boys hadn't asked, they didn't tell her, they just wrote it, because in their eyes it made sense. When things went wrong, when something hurt, she was the one they called. She stood at the counter, the form still in her hand, staring at her name as if it didn't belong there, but also couldn't be erased. Not because of ego, but because of love. The real kind. Quiet, steady, uninvited, but never unwanted. When Jonathan came downstairs, she almost didn't show him. But something in her said, "Don't hide this." So she placed it on the counter, not dramatic, not folded, and stepped back. He entered the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes, one hand still buttoning his cuff. Saw the paper, picked it up. His eyes scanned quickly, then stopped. Evelyn didn't speak, just waited. He looked at the penciled name, the small letters, the soft mark his sons had made. He said nothing, just stood there, holding the form, the morning sun bleeding in through the window, dust catching in the light like floating threads. Finally, he spoke, but it wasn't what she expected. "She's who they call when they're scared." His voice was quiet, almost unsure. Evelyn met his eyes, said nothing, just nodded. Once, no defense, no explanation. He turned back to the form, looked at the line again, then reached for a pen. No rush, just a steady signature next to her name. Jonathan Scott. The ink pressed into the paper. Permanent, final. Not adoption, not a title, but something else. Permission, for love to stretch, for grief to share its weight, for family to mean more than biology or blood. He set the pen down, folded the form, then looked at her. Not guarded, not boss to employee, just man to woman, parent to parent. "Thank you," he said, "for catching what I couldn't." And Evelyn, still standing there in yesterday's sweater and soft eyes, simply nodded. "I didn't catch it," she whispered. "They handed it to me." That night, after dinner, the boys ran to the fridge to hang their drawings like they always did. But this time Evelyn added something beside them, a small magnet, a scrap of paper, 3 words in her handwriting. "Love lives here." It didn't ask for attention, didn't shine, but it stayed, and it held. The recipe book hadn't moved from its place on the counter. Jonathan hadn't asked her to put it away. Evelyn hadn't rushed to return it. It stayed, like a photograph you don't know whether to frame or close in a drawer. On Tuesday morning, Evelyn opened it again. The boys were at school. The house was quiet. The pages still smelled faintly like cinnamon and old paper. Some were stiff from years of sugar and spills. Others were soft at the edges, corners bent like someone had turned them again and again. She was searching for Margaret's pancake recipe. The boys had asked for it. "Not just any pancakes," Kevin had said. "Mum's ones, the ones that feel warm on the inside." Evelyn didn't know what that meant, but she told them she'd try. As she flipped through the book, a loose piece of paper slipped out from the back, yellowed slightly, folded into thirds. She paused, unfolded it carefully. At the top, in Margaret's familiar handwriting, it read, "To whoever helps them laugh when I can't." Evelyn's breath caught, her fingers trembled. The letter was short, but it reached deeper than anything she could have prepared for. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it, and someone had to step into the silence. Don't try to be me. Don't try to erase what they've lost. Just be there. For their laughter, for the days when they need someone to say, "You're safe." Mothers are not names, they're actions. Evelyn sat down slowly, the letter still in her hands. She didn't cry at first. She just let the silence fill the room. It felt like Margaret had been here the whole time, not haunting, not watching, just trusting. And somehow, Evelyn had walked into that trust without even knowing it. She read the letter again, then a third time, and when the tears finally came, they were quiet, not from guilt, not from grief, but from the overwhelming weight of permission to stay, to love, to belong, not because she earned it, but because Margaret made room for her. That evening, Evelyn taped the letter to the fridge, tucked in behind the boys' drawings and the lunch menu. Not on display, but not hidden. Jonathan noticed it as soon as he walked in. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and something warm. The boys were dancing around the island, laughing, cheeks flushed, and there it was, the letter. He stepped closer, read it once, didn't speak. Evelyn watched from across the room, heart in her throat. She didn't know if it was okay, if she'd crossed a line. But when he turned, his eyes were soft, no defense, no confusion, just stillness. "She really wrote that?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "I found it in the back of the recipe book." He looked at the letter again, ran a hand through his hair. "She knew," he whispered. "Even back then, she knew someone else would have to finish what she started." Evelyn said nothing, just let the moment breathe. The boys laughed in the background, the sound of socks sliding on tile, a spoon clattering into the sink. Jonathan stepped back, sat at the kitchen table, watched them. Then, after a long pause, he said, almost to himself, "I thought I had to do this alone." Evelyn leaned against the counter, arms folded, voice low. "No one's meant to do this alone." He nodded, eyes still on the twins. "They love you," he said. Finally. Evelyn looked down, swallowing the emotion that rose too fast. "I love them back." It wasn't dramatic, wasn't a revelation. It was just truth. Standing there, steady. Something shifted then. Not loudly, but deeply, like the floor of the house settling after a storm. Like two people finally standing in the same room with the same story. And though nothing had been promised, nothing signed or sealed, something was being rewritten, not by replacement, not by force, but by love, learning how to grow around what was lost. Spring came late that year. The cherry trees at St. Edmund's didn't bloom until after the school changed the sign. The announcement came in a short letter home. "Beginning next year, our annual Mother's Day event will be renamed Family Day of Love." There were no meetings, no press releases, just quiet change, the kind that begins with a moment someone couldn't forget. The boys didn't ask why. They just smiled when Evelyn read it out loud, and Kevin whispered, "It's better this way." A few weeks later, the school invited families to plant a memory tree, one for each class, one for the people who couldn't be there anymore and the ones who showed up anyway. Jonathan came in early from work that day. No briefcase, no suit. He helped Evelyn carry the time capsule the boys made, a shoebox wrapped in red paper, held together with more tape than necessary. Inside, a drawing of their mother, a copy of the paper heart, a recipe card for Margaret's pancakes, jam stains and all, and a photo of the three of them at the tea, the one where Evelyn's eyes were just starting to water, and Jonathan's hand rested gently on the back of her chair. The boys lowered the box into the earth. The principal said a few words, not too many, just enough. Then they planted the tree, a Yoshino cherry, same kind Margaret used to love. Evelyn knelt in the soil beside the boys, smoothing the dirt with both hands. Jonathan stood behind her, then slowly joined them. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His hand brushed hers once, quietly, without hesitation. She didn't pull away. Back at the house, the fridge was full of new drawings. Kevin had drawn the tea party again, this time with Evelyn in the middle, not off to the side. John had drawn the tree, pink blossoms falling like confetti, a small red heart buried under the roots. The letter from Margaret stayed taped above them, still a little wrinkled, still holding. Some nights Evelyn would reread it when no one was around, not because she needed the words again, but because they reminded her she wasn't borrowing this life. She'd been invited into it. One night, weeks after the tree was planted, Jonathan walked into the kitchen after the boys had gone to bed. Evelyn was at the sink, rinsing mugs, her sleeves rolled, hair loose, tired in that familiar way. He leaned against the counter. "I kept thinking someone else would come," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up. Someone else? A person who made it all make sense, who had the right answers, the right title. He paused. "I thought I was waiting for Margaret, or someone like her, but she's not coming back." Evelyn didn't speak, just listened. Jonathan looked at her, not just at her presence, but her place. "She was everything," he said. "And I thought if I held on tight enough, maybe I could be both parents, but I can't. And maybe I was never supposed to." Evelyn wiped her hands on the towel, stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to be everything." She paused. "You just have to be here." Jonathan nodded, looked down for a moment. Then, carefully, reached into his pocket. He pulled out something folded, the boy's note, from the night of the tea. "Thank you for clapping. We were scared, but you made it okay." He unfolded it again, set it gently on the counter between them. "I don't know what we are," he said, "or where this goes, but I know you make it okay." Evelyn looked at the note, then at him, not with answers, but with peace. And maybe that was enough. The next morning the twins woke to something new on the fridge, not a recipe, not a schedule, just a note in Evelyn's handwriting. "Love lives here always." And beside it, in Jonathan's, "And it's welcome to stay." If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of someone you lost, someone who stayed, or someone who quietly showed up when they didn't have to, then maybe you understand now. Love isn't about replacing what's gone, it's about choosing to remain, even when you weren't expected. Here at Elevated Heart Stories, we tell the kind of stories that live where words fall short, the ones that reach into silence and come back with something real. So if this story meant something to you, don't just click away. Subscribe, like, share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Because from wherever you are, if your heart is open, you belong here. This is Elevated Heart Stories. He'd spent millions trying to save his son. Every specialist, every treatment, every prayer. Nothing worked. His 3-year-old boy was dying and no one could tell him why. Until the day he came home and heard a sound he hadn't heard in months. His son crying. Not weak, not fading, screaming. He ran toward the sound, heart pounding, terrified of what he'd find. What he saw in that room changed everything. Benjamin Miller had everything except the one thing that mattered, his son's life. Jason had been dying for over a year, slowly, every morning weaker, every night closer to gone. It started after the accident, the one that took Catherine, his wife, in a single moment. Jason was only 2 when he lost his mother. The grief hit him like a bomb. He stopped eating, stopped smiling, started fading. Benjamin did what any father with unlimited money would do. He hired the best doctors in the world, specialists from 3 continents. Every test, every treatment, every desperate attempt to understand why his son was slipping away. The answer was always the same. Trauma, weakened immune system, we're doing everything we can. But Jason kept dying, and Benjamin kept drowning in work 18-hour days, endless meetings, anything to avoid the truth waiting in his son's room. His mother Eleanor moved in to help. Marcus, his best friend and business partner, visited daily. Dr. Sterling made house calls twice a week, adjusting medications, running tests. Everyone was trying. So why wasn't Jason getting better? That Tuesday afternoon, Benjamin came home early. The penthouse felt wrong, too quiet, or maybe too loud. He couldn't tell. Then he heard it, crying. Not the weak sound Jason had been making for months. This was raw, desperate. A child screaming. Benjamin's heart stopped. He dropped everything and ran. When he reached Jason's room and opened the door, what he saw didn't make sense. Maria, the new maid who'd been there only 3 weeks, was on the floor holding his son. Jason was crying, thrashing in her arms, but his eyes were open, alert, alive in a way they hadn't been in over a year. Maria looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Miller," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I found something." And in that moment, everything Benjamin thought he knew about his son's illness shattered. Before we begin, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this story is about the moment everything changes, when someone finally sees the truth, when hope walks in through the last door you'd expect. Stay with me. Maria almost turned around 3 times before she reached the door. 6 a.m. Manhattan still waking up. The Miller building rose like a glass tower, and somewhere 30 floors up, a family she didn't know was waiting. She needed this job. Her mama's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. But standing in that lobby, something whispered, "Turn around. This isn't for you." She got in the elevator anyway. Mrs. Chen met her in the kitchen, sharp eyes, no smile. She poured coffee and slid it across the counter. "Mr. Miller values privacy. You clean quietly. No questions. No involvement in family matters. Understood?" Maria nodded. "His son Jason is very sick. You'll clean his room last." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped. "And whatever you see in there, it's not your business." An hour later, Maria stood outside Jason's door, heart pounding. The hallway was lined with photos, Benjamin and Catherine Miller smiling at galas, on beaches, holding glasses of champagne. Catherine's smile made you believe in forever, but in the later pictures, Benjamin's eyes looked empty, like he already knew happiness doesn't last. Maria opened the door. Cold air hit her like winter. The room looked perfect. Expensive crib, toys on shelves, painted clouds on the ceiling, but it felt wrong, dead. Jason lay in the crib, barely moving. Grey skin, hollow eyes, lips almost blue. Maria's breath caught. She'd raised her cousins back home. She knew what healthy babies looked like. This wasn't sickness. This was something else. She reached down. His hand was ice cold. Her eyes went to the thermostat. 60 degrees. Someone had turned the heat off. In a baby's room. Maria's hands shook as she adjusted it to 72. Warm air hummed through the vents. She lifted Jason carefully. He was so light, it terrified her, and that's when she smelled it. Chemical, sharp, wrong. She pulled back his sleeve. Dark purple marks under his arm. Fresh, precise. Not bruises. Injection sites. Her stomach twisted. She pulled out her phone and took photos. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. On the nightstand sat 3 prescription bottles. She photographed those too. That's when she heard footsteps. Heavy, getting closer. Maria's heart slammed. She put Jason back quickly, grabbed a dust cloth, spun toward the window. The door opened. A man in an expensive suit stepped in. 40-something. Smile that didn't touch his eyes. "You must be the new girl," he said smoothly. "Marcus Webb, Jason's godfather." He walked to the crib and looked down at Jason with eyes that made Maria's blood go cold. "How's he doing this morning?" "I don't know, sir. I was just—" "You turned up the heat." "Not a question." Maria's throat went dry. The room was cold. Marcus smiled. "Benjamin's mother has rules about that. Wouldn't want you getting in trouble your first week." He checked his watch. "Dr. Sterling comes at 10 for Jason's treatment. Be ready." He walked to the door. Stopped. "One more thing, Maria." His voice dropped. "Curiosity isn't rewarded here. It's punished." He left. Maria stood frozen, staring at the door. 10 o'clock. Dr. Sterling was coming. And Maria had just stumbled onto something that could get her killed. Maria was cleaning the living room when she heard him. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, like someone walking underwater. She looked up. A man stood in the hallway, tall, early 40s, wearing a wrinkled shirt and pants that probably cost more than her rent. His hair needed cutting. His eyes needed sleep. He stared at the wall like he'd forgotten why he'd walked into the room. Benjamin Miller. For a moment, he didn't seem to notice her. He just stood there, holding a coffee mug, staring at nothing. Then his eyes found hers. "You're new," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "Yes, sir." "Maria, I started this week." He nodded slowly, like processing the information took effort. His gaze drifted toward the hallway toward Jason's room, but he didn't move. Just stared in that direction, like there was a wall he couldn't cross. "Is he awake?" Benjamin asked quietly. I think so, sir." Benjamin's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something, do something, but he just stood there, frozen. "I should check on him," he finally said, but he didn't move. Maria watched this man, this billionaire who could buy anything, stand 3 feet from his son's door and not be able to walk through it. "Mr. Miller," she said softly. "He's okay. I made sure the room was warm." Something flickered across Benjamin's face. Pain, or maybe guilt. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he turned and walked away, back down the hall, back to wherever he'd been hiding. Maria stood there, heart aching for reasons she couldn't explain. That's when the elevator doors opened. Marcus Webb stepped out, fresh suit, perfect hair, confident smile. He carried a leather bag and moved like he owned the place. "Maria, right?" He set the bag down. "Benjamin around?" He went back to his office. Marcus's smile tightened. Of course he did. He glanced toward Jason's room. "How's the boy this morning?" "I don't know, sir." Marcus checked his watch. "Dr. Sterling should be here soon. Jason's weekly treatment. Very important. We stay on schedule." The way he said, "treatment," made Maria's skin crawl. "What kind of treatment?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Medical treatment. For his condition." He picked up his bag. "You're curious. I noticed that earlier. Curiosity is dangerous, Maria, especially for someone in your position." His voice was still friendly, but the threat underneath was clear. "You seem like a smart girl. Smart enough to know when to mind your business." He walked past her toward Benjamin's office, leaving Maria standing alone in the living room. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket. Those photos, those marks. The elevator dinged. An older man stepped out, 60s, grey hair, black medical bag, kind face that somehow felt wrong. "Dr. Sterling." Maria's pulse quickened. He smiled at her. "Good morning. I'm here to see Jason." "Of course." Maria's voice came out steadier than she felt. "His room is down the hall." Dr. Sterling walked past her, and Maria made a decision. She was going to find out exactly what this man was doing to that little boy, even if it killed her. Maria positioned herself in the hallway closet. Through the crack in the door, she had a clear view of Jason's room. Her heart hammered so hard she thought they'd hear it. Dr. Sterling was inside. Marcus stood beside him, and Jason, tiny, grey, barely breathing Jason lay on the changing table. "Same dosage as last week?" Dr. Sterling's voice drifted out. "Increase it slightly." Marcus's tone was casual, like ordering coffee. Benjamin starting to ask questions. "We need visible decline." Maria's blood went ice cold. Dr. Sterling hesitated. "Marcus, I don't know if you're getting paid very well to not know things." Marcus cut him off. "Do your job." Silence. Then the sound of a medical bag, unzipping. Maria pressed closer to the crack, her breath shallow. Dr. Sterling pulled out a syringe. His hands shook as he filled it with clear liquid from a small vial. He looked at Marcus. "This is the last time. After this, I'm done." Marcus smiled. Cold. Empty. "You've been saying that for 6 months. I mean it this time." "No, you don't." Marcus leaned against the wall. "You're in too deep. The money I've paid you, the malpractice suits I've covered, you walk away now, you lose everything." Dr. Sterling's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He turned to Jason. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice suddenly warm. Fake warm. "Just a little medicine. You won't even feel it." Jason's eyes opened dull, exhausted, and he made a small sound. Not quite a cry. Just resignation. Like he'd been through this too many times to fight anymore. Maria's throat tightened. Dr. Sterling lifted Jason's arm, found the spot under his armpit where the other marks were, pressed the needle into tender skin. Jason whimpered. The sound broke something inside Maria. She watched the clear liquid disappear into that tiny body, watched Dr. Sterling pull the needle out and press a cotton ball over the wound, watched Marcus check his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. "How long until we see effects?" Marcus asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. Dr. Sterling packed his bag quickly, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "He'll be noticeably weaker by this afternoon." "Good. Benjamin's been working too much to notice, but we can't take chances." Marcus walked toward the door. Same time next week. They left. Maria stayed frozen in the closet, pulse roaring in her ears. She'd just watched them poison a child. In broad daylight, in his own home, and nobody knew. Nobody cared. Nobody was stopping them, except maybe her. She waited until their footsteps faded, then slipped out of the closet and into Jason's room. The little boy lay on the changing table, tears sliding silently down his grey cheeks. Maria picked him up carefully, holding him close. "I've got you, baby. I promise. I've got you." But even as she said it, she felt Jason's body growing weaker in her arms. 20 minutes, Dr. Sterling had said. Maria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She had evidence now. Photos. What she'd witnessed. The medications. But who could she tell? Who would believe a maid over a doctor and a billionaire? Then she remembered. Benjamin. The broken father who couldn't even walk into his son's room. If she could make him see what was happening, really see it, maybe together they could stop this. But first, she had to keep Jason alive, until she figured out how. Maria couldn't eat. She sat in the staff break room, staring at a sandwich she'd bought that morning. Her hands still shook. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it, the needle, the clear liquid, Jason's silent tears. 20 minutes, Dr. Sterling had said. It had been 45. She'd cleaned 3 rooms since then, moving on autopilot, her mind screaming the whole time. She needed to tell someone. She needed to do something. But who? Mrs. Chen wouldn't listen. Marcus would destroy her. Dr. Sterling was part of it. That left Benjamin, the father who couldn't even look at his own son. Maria stood, her decision made. She walked down the hall toward Benjamin's office, rehearsing what she'd say. "Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you about Jason. It's urgent. Life or death." The office door was cracked open. She knocked softly. "Mr. Miller?" No answer. She pushed the door wider. Benjamin sat at his desk, surrounded by 3 computer monitors, a phone pressed to his ear. He was talking numbers, stock prices, quarterly projections, things that sounded important to everyone except the people who mattered. He glanced up, saw Maria, and held up one finger. "Wait." She waited. 5 minutes became 10. The call kept going. Benjamin's voice never changed, flat, robotic, like he was reading a script written by someone else. Finally, he hung up. "Yes?" He didn't look at her, just stared at his screen. "Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you about Jason." His fingers stopped typing, but he still didn't look up. "Is he okay?" The question hung in the air. Maria wanted to scream. "When was the last time you checked?" "I think something's wrong, something serious." Benjamin's jaw tightened. Dr. Sterling was just here. If there was something wrong, he would have told me. But what if... Maria... His voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath, she heard it: exhaustion, grief, the voice of a man barely holding on. "I appreciate your concern, but Jason's medical care is handled by professionals, people who went to medical school, people who know what they're doing. I understand that, but I can't do this right now." Benjamin finally looked at her, and Maria saw it clearly for the first time. He wasn't just tired, he was drowning, barely keeping his head above water. "I have 3 meetings today. A board call at 2. Investors flying in tomorrow. I can't." His voice cracked. "I can't fall apart right now. Your son needs you." The words came out harder than Maria intended. Benjamin's face went pale, then hard. "Thank you for your concern," he said coldly. "You can go." "Mr. Miller, I said you can go." Maria stood there, her heart breaking for this man and hating him at the same time. She turned and walked out. Behind her, she heard Benjamin's phone ring again, heard him answer it, heard his voice go robotic again, discussing things that didn't matter, while his son died 3 rooms away. Maria walked back to Jason's room. The little boy lay in his crib, breathing shallow and weak, exactly like Dr. Sterling had promised. She picked him up gently. His skin was colder than before. "Your daddy can't see you right now," she whispered. "But I do. I see you. Baby." Jason's fingers wrapped weakly around her thumb. Maria made a decision in that moment. If Benjamin couldn't save his son, she would. Even if it meant losing everything. Even if it meant standing alone against people with power she'd never have. She pulled out her phone and stared at the photos she'd taken. The marks, the medications, the evidence. "Tomorrow," Marcus had said, "investors were coming. which meant Benjamin would be distracted, which meant tomorrow Maria would dig deeper and find out exactly how deep this evil went. Maria wasn't supposed to be in Benjamin's office. Mrs. Chen had specifically said he was out for the day meetings downtown, wouldn't be back until evening. The office was off limits unless he requested cleaning. But Maria needed answers. She slipped inside quietly, closing the door behind her. The room smelled like leather and coffee. 3 monitors glowed on the desk, papers everywhere. A man drowning in work to avoid feeling anything. She started with the desk drawers, pens, business cards, nothing useful. Then she saw it. A folder on the corner of the desk, thick, official-looking. The tab read, Estate Planning, Updated. Maria's hands trembled as she opened it. Legal documents. Pages and pages of language she barely understood. She flipped through quickly, looking for anything that made sense. Then she stopped. Last Will and Testament of Benjamin Miller. Her eyes scanned down the page. In the event of my death or mental incapacity, full legal guardianship of Jason Alexander Miller, along with controlling interest in Miller Tech Industries, shall pass to Marcus James Webb until Jason reaches the age of 25. The words blurred. Maria read it again, then a third time. If Benjamin died or couldn't take care of Jason, Marcus got everything. The child, the company, total control for 22 years. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just about hurting Jason. This was about taking everything. She pulled out her phone and photographed every page, hands shaking so badly she had to steady herself against the desk. That's when she heard voices in the hallway. Maria's heart stopped. She shoved the folder back where she'd found it and looked around frantically. No time to leave without being seen. She dropped to the floor and slid under the desk just as the door opened. Telling you, Benjamin, the audit can wait. Marcus's voice, smooth, confident. We've got the investor meeting tomorrow. That's what matters. The audit is scheduled in 3 months. Benjamin sounded exhausted. It's routine. I know. I'm just saying, with everything you're dealing with, Jason's health, the pressure, maybe we push it back. Give yourself breathing room. Silence. Maria held her breath under the desk, pulse hammering in her ears. Jason's getting worse, Benjamin said quietly. Doctor, Sterling says it's the trauma. That grief affects children physically. But I don't, his voice broke. I don't know how to help him. You're doing everything you can. Marcus's voice was warm, sympathetic, fake. Listen, I've been thinking. If things get too hard, if you need time away to clear your head, I'm here. I'll take care of Jason. You know that, right? I know. Good. Because you're running yourself into the ground, Ben. And Jason needs you strong. More silence. I should check on him, Benjamin said. You should rest. You've got back-to-back meetings tomorrow. I'll check on Jason. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Footsteps. The door closing. Maria waited, barely breathing. Then she heard it. Marcus's voice, low and cold. On the phone now. It's me. No, he's not suspicious yet. The audit's still 3 months out. A pause. Sterling increased the dosage today. We should see significant decline by the weekend. Another pause. I know the risks. But if we do this right, Benjamin will be too broken to function. I'll have guardianship and control before he even realizes what's happening. Silence. No, the maid's not a problem. Just some girl from Chicago. She won't cause trouble. Maria's blood ran ice cold. Marcus hung up. His footsteps moved toward the door. She stayed frozen under the desk until she heard him leave. Then she crawled out, gasping for air like she'd been underwater. She looked at her phone. The photos of the will. The evidence. Marcus was embezzling. The audit would expose him. So he was poisoning Jason to get guardianship and control of the company before Benjamin found out. And if Jason died, Benjamin would spiral completely. Marcus would have everything. Maria's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She thought about her mama's voice. When you see evil, baby, you don't run. You stand. But how do you stand against someone with unlimited money and power? How do you fight when you're just a girl nobody believes? Maria looked toward the hallway toward Jason's room. She didn't know how, yet, but she was going to stop this, even if it killed her. Maria found Jason turning blue. It was 3 a.m. She'd stayed late, couldn't leave, something in her gut screaming that tonight was different. She'd been dozing in the staff room when she heard it, a sound that wasn't quite a cry, more like a gasp. She ran. Jason's room was dark, cold again. Someone had turned the heat back down. The little boy lay in his crib, lips blue, chest barely moving. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. No, 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 no. Maria scooped him up. His body was limp, freezing. Jason, baby, stay with me. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911. What's your emergency? I need an ambulance. A child, he's 3 years old. He's not breathing right. His lips are blue. What's the address? Maria gave it. The operator kept talking, asking questions, but Maria barely heard. She was holding Jason against her chest, rubbing his back, begging him to breathe. Come on, baby. Please. Don't leave. Don't you leave. She heard the elevator ding. Footsteps running. Benjamin burst through the door, still in his suit from wherever he'd been. His face went white when he saw Maria holding his son. What happened? His voice cracked. He wasn't breathing right. I called 911. Benjamin took Jason from her arms. And for the first time since Maria had started working here, she saw him really look at his son. Really see him. The grey skin, the sunken eyes, the way his small body barely had weight anymore. My God. Benjamin's voice broke. What's happening to him? Maria's throat tightened. This was it, the moment. She could stay silent and keep her job, or she could tell the truth and lose everything. She thought of her mama, of Jason's weak fingers wrapped around her thumb, of the evil hiding in plain sight. Mr. Miller, she whispered, someone's been poisoning him. Benjamin's head snapped up. What? I found marks under his arms, injection sites, medications he shouldn't be taking. I've been watching, and That's insane. But his voice wavered, like part of him already knew. Dr. Sterling and Marcus. I saw them. I heard them talking about dosages, about making him weaker. Marcus. Benjamin's face went pale. No, Marcus is his godfather. He loves. He wants guardianship. Maria pulled out her phone, hands shaking. I found your will. If something happens to you, Marcus gets Jason and the company. And I heard him on the phone. He's embezzling. The audit in 3 months will expose him. So he's... Her voice broke. He's killing Jason to get control before you find out. The room went silent, except for Jason's labored breathing. Benjamin stared at her, then at his son, then at the marks on Jason's arm that he'd somehow never noticed. Show me, he whispered. Maria showed him the photos, the medications, the will, everything. Benjamin's hands started shaking. His face crumbled. I've been so blind. Tears streamed down his face. I couldn't look at him without seeing Catherine, so I just stopped looking. And while I was hiding, someone was murdering my son. Sirens wailed outside, but Benjamin didn't move. He just held Jason, finally present, finally seeing. I'm sorry, he sobbed. Jason, I'm so sorry. The paramedics rushed in, and as they took Jason, Benjamin grabbed Maria's arm. Help me stop them, he said. Please, help me save my son. Maria nodded, because this wasn't just her fight anymore. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. Maria sat in a plastic chair, still wearing her work clothes, staring at the floor. Benjamin paced, back and forth, like if he stopped moving, he'd shatter. They'd been waiting 2 hours. Jason was somewhere behind those double doors, doctors running tests, nurses hooking him to machines, trying to figure out what was killing him. But Maria already knew, and so did Benjamin. He stopped pacing, stood in front of the window, forehead pressed against the glass. I used to read to him every night, Benjamin said quietly. Before Catherine died, we'd sit in that rocking chair, and I'd read until he fell asleep. His voice cracked. After the accident, I couldn't. Every time I looked at him, I saw her. So I just stopped going in. Maria said nothing, just listened. I told myself I was providing for him, best doctors, best care, that I was being a good father by making sure he had everything. He laughed bitterly. But I wasn't in the room. I wasn't holding him. I wasn't seeing him. You were grieving, Maria said softly. I was hiding. Benjamin turned around, eyes red. And Marcus knew it. He used my grief as a weapon. Made me think Jason's decline was normal. Made me trust him while his fists clenched. My best friend since college. The man I chose to be my son's godfather. The double doors opened. A doctor came out, young, tired, holding a tablet. "Mr. Miller?" Benjamin rushed over. Maria stood but stayed back, unsure if she belonged in this moment. "Your son is stable," the doctor said, "but we found something concerning in his blood work." "What?" "Toxic levels of immunosuppressants and anticoagulants, medications that suppress the immune system and thin the blood. No child his age should be taking these, especially not at these concentrations." Benjamin's face went white. "Someone's been giving him these intentionally?" the doctor asked carefully. "Yes." Benjamin's voice was barely a whisper. The doctor's expression hardened. "I've already contacted the police. There's a detective on her way. This is a criminal matter now, Mr. Miller." Benjamin nodded, unable to speak. "You can see him in a few minutes. We're running fluids, starting chelation therapy to remove the toxins. He's going to need time to recover, but—" the doctor's voice softened. "You got him here in time. Another day or two." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Benjamin sank into a chair, head in his hands. Maria sat beside him. "Thank you," he whispered. "If you hadn't stayed, if you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't—" He couldn't finish. "I couldn't walk away from him," Maria said simply. They sat in silence until Benjamin finally spoke again. "I have security cameras. In every room. I installed them after Catherine died because I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong." He looked at Maria. "I have footage of everything. Every injection, every conversation, everything Marcus and Dr. Sterling did. Then we have proof. We have more than proof. We have enough to put them in prison for the rest of their lives." His voice turned to steel. "I'm going to destroy him. For what he did to my son, for using my grief, for—" His voice broke again. Footsteps approached. A woman in a grey suit appeared, 40s, sharp eyes, badge on her belt. "Mr. Miller, I'm Detective Sarah Walsh, Special Victims Unit." Benjamin stood. Maria stood with him. "I need to hear everything," Detective Walsh said. And as Benjamin started talking, telling her about Marcus, about Dr. Sterling, about the embezzlement and the will and the poisoning, Maria saw something change in him. The ghost was waking up. The father was coming back. An hour later, Detective Walsh closed her notebook. "We'll execute warrants tonight," she said. "Marcus Webb's home and office. Dr. Sterling's practice. With the video evidence and medical records, this case is airtight." Benjamin nodded. "Can I see my son now?" he asked quietly. The nurse appeared. "Room 304. But please, he's very weak. Don't stay long." Benjamin walked toward the room, stopped, turned to Maria. "Will you come with me?" Maria's throat tightened. "Are you sure?" "You're the only reason he's still alive." Benjamin's eyes filled. "You stayed when I couldn't. You saw him when I wouldn't. Please." They walked together down the sterile hallway, and when Benjamin opened the door to room 304, Maria saw him finally break. Jason looked so small in that hospital bed. Tubes ran from his arms. Monitors beeped softly. His skin was still grey, but his chest moved steadily now. In and out. Fighting. Benjamin stood in the doorway, frozen. Maria touched his arm gently. "He needs you." Benjamin took a shaky breath and walked to the bedside. He sat down slowly, like he was afraid he'd break something. Then he reached out and took Jason's tiny hand in his. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "It's Daddy." Jason's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then they found his father's face. And something impossible happened. Jason smiled. Weak, barely there, but real. Benjamin broke. Tears poured down his face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have seen. I should have—" Jason's small fingers squeezed his father's hand. The machines kept beeping. The fluorescent lights hummed. But in that moment, something sacred happened in room 304. A father found his son again. Maria stepped back toward the door, giving them space. She pulled out her phone, 17 missed calls. Mrs. Chen. 2 numbers she didn't recognize. Then a text from Detective Walsh. "Warrants executed. Both in custody. Call me." Maria's heart pounded. She stepped into the hallway and dialed. "Gibson?" Detective Walsh answered immediately. "Where are you?" "Street Luke's Hospital. With Mr. Miller and Jason." "Good. Stay there. We got them both. Tell me." Marcus Webb was arrested at his office an hour ago. Tried to run, made it to the parking garage before officers tackled him. Found him trying to wipe his laptop. Walsh's voice turned cold. Too late. We already had everything from Miller's security footage. And Dr. Sterling broke down the second we showed him the evidence. Full confession. Bank records showing Marcus paid him $500,000 over 18 months. Every injection documented. Every conversation recorded. A pause. He's testifying against Webb in exchange for a reduced sentence. Maria closed her eyes. It's really over. For them? Yes. Marcus Webb is looking at attempted murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, fraud. He'll die in prison. Sterling loses his license permanently. Minimum 15 years. Justice. Real justice. But it felt hollow somehow. Because Jason was still in that hospital bed, Benjamin had still lost 2 years with his son. Catherine was still gone. Evil had been stopped. But the damage was already done. Gibson, Walsh's voice softened. You did good. Most people would have walked away. You didn't. I couldn't. I know. That's what makes you different. Maria hung up and walked back to the room. Through the window, she saw Benjamin lying beside Jason on the hospital bed carefully, so carefully holding his son like he was made of glass. Jason was awake now, looking at his father, really looking. And Benjamin was crying, whispering things Maria couldn't hear. Probably apologies, probably promises, probably prayers. A nurse passed Maria in the hallway. That father's barely left that room. First time I've seen him actually hold his son. He's been lost, Maria said quietly, but I think he's finding his way back. The nurse smiled sadly. Some people need permission to heal. Looks like you gave him that. Maria's phone buzzed. A news alert. Billionaire's business partner arrested in shocking child poisoning case. It was already spreading. The story the world would see. Wealth, betrayal, near tragedy. But Maria knew the real story. It was about a father too broken to see, a child too weak to cry, and a woman who refused to look away when everyone told her to. Maria looked back through the window. Benjamin caught her eye and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. She nodded. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something else. Something harder than stopping evil. Learning to live after it. Maria stood at the window of her new office, watching the park across the street. The sign on the door behind her read, Gibson Family Advocacy Center, When Silence Costs Lives. Benjamin had funded it, not out of guilt, though he carried plenty of that, but because Maria had shown him something. One person paying attention can change everything. Her phone rang. A mother from Connecticut. Her daughter's nanny noticed bruises. Nobody was listening. Tell me everything, Maria said, grabbing her notebook. Don't leave anything out. This was her life now. Teaching people to see what others missed, to speak when silence felt safer, to stand when standing felt impossible. 47 children so far, 47 lives saved because someone finally paid attention. Through the window, she saw them, Benjamin and Jason in the park, father and son, running through fallen leaves. Jason's laugh carried on the wind, full, bright, alive. His skin glowed pink with health, his eyes sparkled the way 4-year-old eyes should. Benjamin chased him, both of them breathless with joy. No more grey skin, no more hollow eyes, no more dying in plain sight. Just a little boy being a little boy, and a father finally present enough to see it. They spotted Maria in the window. Jason waved frantically, jumping up and down. Benjamin lifted him onto his shoulders, and they walked toward the building. 5 minutes later, they burst through her office door. Maria! Jason launched himself at her. She caught him, laughing, holding him tight. Hey, baby, you get taller every time I see you. Daddy says I'm gonna be bigger than him. Benjamin smiled a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes now. We brought lunch. Thought you might be hungry. They sat on the floor of her office like they did most Tuesdays. Sandwiches from the deli, apple juice for Jason, coffee for the adults. How's the new case? Benjamin asked quietly, watching his son color at Maria's desk. Scary, but we'll get her out. Benjamin nodded. He understood now. Understood that evil didn't just live in penthouses, that children everywhere needed someone to notice, to care, to fight. We got the sentencing today, he said. Marcus got life without parole, additional charges for Catherine's death. Maria had known it was coming, but hearing it still felt like something settling into place. Justice. Imperfect, but real. How do you feel? She asked. Benjamin watched his son. I spent a year hating him, hating myself, drowning in what I missed, what I lost. He paused. But Jason's therapist said something last week. She said grief is just love with nowhere to go, and I'd been directing mine at work, at anger, at everything except the person who needed it most. Jason looked up from his coloring. Daddy doesn't work all the time anymore. No, Benjamin said softly. I don't. He'd stepped back from Miller Tech, hired new leadership, still involved but no longer consumed, because he'd learned something most people never do. You can build empires and still lose everything that matters. Jason tugged Maria's sleeve. I made you something. He handed her a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one small. That's you and me, he explained. The day you saved me. Maria's throat tightened. She looked at this little boy, alive, thriving, whole, and felt something break open in her chest. You know what I think, she said, pulling him close. I think maybe we saved each other. Benjamin's eyes filled. You gave me my son back. You gave me my life back. You were always his father, Maria said gently. You just needed someone to remind you. They sat in comfortable silence. Jason colored. Benjamin sipped coffee. Maria answered emails from families in crisis. Outside, the sun broke through clouds. And Maria thought about her mama's voice from all those years ago. Sometimes, baby, God puts you exactly where you need to be, even when it costs you everything, because somebody needs you to be brave. She'd been terrified that first morning in the Miller penthouse. A girl from Chicago's South Side, with nothing but instinct and courage. She'd risked everything, her job, her safety, her life for a child who wasn't hers. And in the process, she'd learned something she'd carry forever. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, refusing to look away when everyone else does. Sometimes it's just staying, seeing, caring when caring costs you everything. Jason looked up from his drawing. Maria, can you come to my birthday party? Wouldn't miss it, baby. Benjamin caught her eye and smiled, grateful, humbled, forever changed. Because some people come into your life for a reason. Some save you, and some teach you that the bravest thing you can do is fight for someone else's child when the whole world tells you it's not your place. Maria looked at the phone on her desk. It would ring again tomorrow. Another family, another crisis, another child who needed someone to see them. And she'd answer. Because she'd learned something in that cold penthouse room. Every child deserves someone who refuses to walk away. Every child deserves someone brave enough to stand, even when standing costs everything. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know. And if this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is simply care. Subscribe for more stories that remind you you're not alone. Hope is real, and love always finds a way. Dominic Patterson's heart skipped when he arrived home unexpectedly early that Thursday. He never planned to witness what he saw in the backyard. But once he did, there was no turning back. The storm had ended just moments before. The sky still trembled with grey, and the patio stones gleamed wet under a quiet sun. Dominic hadn't meant to come home early. The meeting downtown had been cancelled at the last minute, and instead of heading back to the office, he'd told his driver to take him home. It wasn't like him. He rarely broke routine. But something about that afternoon, maybe the weight of silence in the car, maybe the memory of a dream he couldn't shake, pushed him to go back. And now, standing just inside the glass doors of his house, his breath caught in his throat. He heard it before he saw it. Laughter. Genuine, unfiltered, and wild. It was coming from outside. At first, Dominic thought it must have been the neighbors' kids, but then, as he stepped forward, he saw them, and his world cracked open. His 7-year-old son, Ryan, was outside in the backyard, walking, with forearm crutches, yes, and slowly. But walking. He was barefoot, stepping with careful focus into a puddle that shimmered beneath him. His t-shirt clung to him from sweat or rain, Dominic didn't know which. And in front of him, kneeling on the damp grass with a towel, was Nora King, the maid. She had been hired 3 weeks ago to clean floors and prepare guest rooms. That was it. Nothing more. But here she was, barefoot too, guiding Ryan's steps like a coach guiding a dancer, her hands steady, her voice soft and firm. "One more, yes, just like that," she whispered. "Proud chest, strong legs. You're doing it, baby, you're doing it." Ryan grinned, wide and unguarded. It was a look Dominic hadn't seen in years. Something warm and foreign tugged in his chest. What the hell was happening? Was this dangerous? Was she qualified? Why hadn't she asked permission? His mind raced with questions, none of them with answers. He didn't move. Couldn't. He stood like stone, staring through the glass. A part of him burned with fury. Another part, deep and unspoken, felt something much harder to name. Guilt. Maybe awe. The sky crackled softly overhead, and a breeze moved across the garden like a sigh. Nora didn't see him. She was focused entirely on Ryan, adjusting his stance with the towel beneath his foot, helping him balance in the slickness. She wasn't smiling in a performative way. She wasn't pretending. She was right there with him. Every shaky step. Dominic's fists clenched and unclenched by his sides. His jaw tightened. What gave her the right? And yet, what had given him the right to stop trying? For months, Ryan had barely spoken. He'd withdrawn after the accident, after Marissa died, after the funeral and the therapy, and the endless carousel of hired caretakers who came and went, each one more impersonal than the last. Dominic had poured millions into treatments, none of which had touched Ryan's spirit, and now here in the backyard, Ryan was walking, laughing, trusting, because of her. The maid. Dominic stepped back slowly, afraid to disrupt the moment. His hands trembled as they reached for the door handle. He didn't open it. He just watched. Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story makes you believe that nothing is impossible if only you believe. Later that evening, Dominic barely touched his dinner. He sat at the head of the long dining table, his tie loosened, a fork resting uselessly in his hand. Ryan had already gone to bed, exhausted but smiling, and Nora had quietly returned to the guest room hallway without a word. The image wouldn't leave him, her kneeling, his son laughing. And that sound, that wild belly-deep sound, it echoed in his head like music he hadn't known he missed. He rose from the table and poured himself a drink, something strong, and stood by the window looking out at the garden. The puddle was still there, reflecting the soft porch lights like glass. 9 caretakers in 6 weeks. None had gotten close to Ryan. Most had given up within days. One had claimed Ryan was emotionally unreachable, but Nora hadn't asked permission, hadn't waited for instruction. She'd just acted on instinct or impulse or something else entirely. He'd seen it on her face. She believed in Ryan, and Ryan believed in her. That thought hit him harder than expected, and deeper. Dominic set the glass down harder than he meant to. Liquid sloshed onto the counter. He had questions, and tomorrow morning he was going to get answers. Dominic set the glass down harder than he meant to. Liquid sloshed onto the counter. He had questions, and tomorrow morning he was going to get answers. But the morning didn't make things clearer. It made everything worse. His usual routine, espresso, emails, morning brief, unraveled before the first hour passed. The numbers on his screen blurred. His assistant's voice became background static. No matter how hard he tried to focus, his mind dragged him back to that soaked backyard and the sight of Ryan stepping barefoot into a puddle with Nora at his side. That laughter, that look in his son's eyes. He left the office by noon. Didn't tell anyone why. Didn't need to. Back at the house, the silence felt louder than usual. He moved through the halls like he didn't belong there, like he was intruding in his own home. Then he heard movement in the kitchen. Nora's voice, low, humming something familiar, something warm. He found her by the stove, chopping parsley on the cutting board. The smell of garlic and lemon drifted in the air. She was barefoot again. Dominic stood in the doorway, watching her. She turned slowly when she sensed him. "Mr. Patterson," she said calmly, hands still mid-motion. "I didn't expect you home so early." He didn't respond right away. He stepped into the room and folded his arms. "We need to talk." Nora met his gaze without flinching. Her expression didn't shift, No panic, no guilt, just quiet readiness. "I saw you yesterday," he said, "in the backyard, with Ryan." A pause, then a small nod. "I figured you had." "What were you doing?" His voice was tight. "Who told you to work with him like that?" "No one," she said. "I didn't ask permission." "That much is obvious. I didn't think I needed it, to help a child who wanted help." Dominic felt heat rise in his chest. "He's my son." Nora set the knife down gently. "Yes, and he trusts me." That cut deeper than he expected. He stepped forward, trying to keep control of his voice. "You're not licensed. You could have hurt him." She tilted her head slightly. "Actually, I am licensed. Masters in Pediatric Physical Therapy. Howard University, class of 2015, licensed in 3 states. He blinked. The air shifted. "That's not what's on your resume." "No," she said, "because no one ever calls back when it is." Dominic stared at her. She walked over to the sink and rinsed her hands, speaking as she moved. "I've applied to every children's hospital in Chicago, every private therapy clinic, every charter school. The interviews are polite, sometimes even enthusiastic, but they don't hire me, not with my last name, not with my zip code." She turned off the tap and dried her hands. "Eventually, I stopped waiting to be chosen. I took whatever work I could find. This house was one of the listings. Cleaning floors paid the bills." Dominic let out a slow breath, steadying his thoughts. "So you just decided to become my son's therapist?" Nora met his eyes. "No. I decided to see him." Silence. She stepped forward, folding the towel in her hands. He wouldn't talk, wouldn't make eye contact. He flinched when I got too close. But one morning I found his sketchbook left open on the patio table. Cars, wheels, movement. I complimented the drawings. He didn't answer, but the next day he left another one for me to find. Her voice was softer now. "That's how it started. Quiet things, eye contact, head nods. I never pushed him, never touched him, unless he asked. I earned it, slowly, and when I saw him trying to walk on his own, I offered to help." She set the folded towel down. "I used to run a clinic in D.C., small, community-based. It got defunded. After that, I lost my mum, lost custody of my little brother, came here for a new start. I didn't come to play savior. I came to survive." Dominic couldn't move. He had walked into this kitchen ready to fire her, to put up walls, to re-establish control, but all he felt now was small and humbled. Still, something in him resisted. "You still should have told me," he said. "I'm his father." Nora nodded once. "I know, and I thought about it, but I didn't think you'd listen." He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. "I saw the cameras," she added. "I know you watch." A pause. "I figured, if I was wrong, you'd stop it. But you didn't." She walked past him slowly, then stopped just behind him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes children don't need the most qualified. They need the most present." Dominic turned slowly. She didn't look away. He felt the weight of her words pressing into all the empty spaces he'd been trying to ignore for years. The grief, the shame, the absence he'd filled with work and logic and long silences. "I don't know whether to fire you or thank you," he said honestly. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "You don't have to decide right now." She walked back to the counter, picking up the parsley again. Dominic stood there a moment longer. Then he left the kitchen without another word. But as he passed the hallway where Ryan's sketchbook lay open on the console table, he stopped. On the page, a boy in a puddle, a woman beside him, both smiling. And Dominic, watching from the window. Drawn in careful pencil strokes, with the caption scrawled in a child's unsteady hand. "Miss Nora says I can fly." The next morning, Dominic didn't say anything. Not to Nora, not to Ryan. He just sat with his coffee a little longer, letting the hum of the house settle around him. Nora moved quietly in the background, preparing breakfast, humming to herself. asking Ryan what he wanted in his lunchbox. Dominic watched them both from behind his newspaper, but it wasn't detachment anymore. It was curiosity. Later that day, after Nora and Ryan left for the park, Dominic retreated to his office and pulled up the home security footage. The cameras had been installed after a break-in scare last winter, hidden well, looping silently into the cloud. He'd never had much reason to check them, until now. He scrolled back through the previous week. Morning routines started slowly, Nora arriving almost a full hour before her shift, letting herself in without a sound, setting her bag down, stretching her back like she'd done it 1,000 times. And then, soft knocks on Ryan's door. No words, just presence. The footage from 4 mornings ago showed her kneeling beside him on the carpet, helping him balance on one leg using a rolled-up sock. They were both in pajamas, his oversized, hers mismatched from sleep. Another day, she transformed the hallway runner into a path of balance challenges. Crumpled towels, couch cushions, even a pair of worn oven mitts, laid out like stepping stones. Ryan grinned through every wobble. When he fell, she applauded. When he succeeded, she didn't cheer. She nodded as if she always knew he would. It was makeshift therapy without the machines or white coats. And it was working. Dominic leaned closer to the screen. In the evening footage, Nora stayed after hours, sitting beside Ryan at the dining table as he sketched. He wasn't just doodling cars anymore. He was drawing movement, limbs in motion, figures jumping, walking, dancing. She'd ask questions. "What's the story here? Why is this one smiling?" And Ryan would answer, in whispers at first, then full sentences. Dominic hadn't heard him speak that much in months. He sat back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing deeper. This woman, this stranger, was unlocking something no therapist, no specialist, no school had managed to touch. And she was doing it with towels, drawings, and a patience that didn't ask for praise. The next day, Dominic didn't watch the footage. He watched in person. It was Saturday. He pretended to take a call by the patio doors, leaving them cracked just enough to hear. Nora and Ryan were in the backyard again. Today, she was using spoons, lining them in a zigzag across the grass. Ryan stepped over them one by one, arms out for balance. When he missed a step and kicked one, he laughed instead of freezing. "You're not breaking anything," she said. "You're learning." Dominic smiled without meaning to. He didn't remember the last time he'd seen his son laugh like that. Maybe before the accident, before the silence. He stepped closer, still unnoticed. Then he heard something that stopped him cold. Ryan said clearly, "Miss Nora, do you think I could climb stairs one day?" Nora didn't hesitate. "I think you'll do more than that." Later that night, Dominic couldn't sleep. The house was quiet. Ryan had fallen asleep beside a sketchbook filled with more of those fluid, fearless drawings. Dominic sat alone in the living room, watching the flames curl inside the gas fireplace, thinking about all the things he hadn't seen. Not because they weren't happening, but because he hadn't known where to look. Nora had been here for weeks. She didn't advertise, didn't demand. She just showed up. Again and again. Sunday morning, Dominic made a decision. He woke up early and wandered into the backyard, while Nora and Ryan were setting up another obstacle course with empty milk cartons and strips of painter's tape. Nora looked up, startled. He held up a hand. "Don't stop. I just want to watch." Ryan looked uncertain at first, but then grinned. Nora nodded once, then turned back to Ryan. "All right, showtime." Dominic sat on the edge of the steps, quiet, letting the moment breathe. Ryan moved through the course slowly but confidently. When he struggled, Nora coached. When he hesitated, she modeled. There was no pressure, no timeline, just effort, just trust. And beneath it all, Dominic began to see it, the quiet brilliance in her approach, the science beneath the simplicity, the strategy behind the improvisation. This wasn't chance, it was art. Over the next few days, Dominic found himself lingering longer. Not out of obligation, but out of something else. Guilt. Maybe hope. He watched Nora adapt each day to Ryan's mood, his energy, his body. She never repeated an exercise exactly. She challenged him when he needed pushing, and softened when he showed signs of fatigue. And Ryan responded to her like gravity. He was laughing more, talking more, drawing with colour. He even joked at dinner. "Dad," he said one night, "Miss Nora says my legs are made of springs. What do you think?" Dominic nearly choked on his water. He looked at his son, so alive, so curious, and then at Nora, who was quietly gathering dishes without looking up. "I think Miss Nora's right," Dominic said. Ryan grinned, and Dominic felt something click loose in his chest. Maybe he'd been blind. Maybe he'd been scared. But he wasn't anymore. He was watching. And for the first time in a long time, he was learning. The sun was low, casting a soft gold over the lawn as Ryan stepped out barefoot onto the grass. Nora followed behind him, carrying 2 rolled-up towels and a pair of plastic cones. She placed them in the yard. Nothing fancy, nothing clinical, just enough to mark a small path. Dominic watched from the patio, silent. He hadn't said much all morning. Something about today felt different. Ryan was unusually focused, and Nora hadn't said a word of encouragement yet. She just gave him space, trusted him to begin, and Ryan did. He picked up one crutch, then the other, and placed them aside carefully, deliberately, like he knew what came next would be different. Then he looked ahead at the line of cones, and stepped. It was small, barely a shift forward, but his foot landed, then the other. He wobbled, arms outstretched, but didn't fall. Another step, unsteady, then another. 3 steps, 4, then 5. Dominic stood, heart slamming in his chest. "Miss Nora!" Ryan shouted mid-stride, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" She turned in time to see his 6th step and caught him gently when he swayed. "I saw it, baby," she whispered, crouching beside him. "I saw every second." Ryan beamed. Dominic didn't know he'd moved, but he was halfway across the yard now. He knelt down slowly beside them, his hands trembling. I don't know what to say," he breathed, eyes locked on his son's flushed face. "Ryan, that was—" "Walking," Ryan said softly, still catching his breath. "I walked." Nora gave him a towel to wipe his forehead and turned to Dominic. "He's been ready," she said gently. "His body, his balance. It was there. He just needed someone to believe it was possible." Dominic swallowed hard. Emotion caught in his throat like a knot. All those years of specialists, all those late-night sessions with surgeons and neurologists, their voices thick with restraint, all those charts that said unlikely, limited, delayed. But none of them had seen this, not like Nora had. He looked at her, really looked, and then whispered, "Thank you." She nodded, eyes soft. "He did the work." "You showed him how?" "No," she said. "I just reminded him he could." Dominic let the moment sit in the quiet. The garden held its breath. Somewhere a bird chirped. Ryan leaned back against Nora's knee, tired but glowing. Dominic sat beside them, knees in the grass, hands on his lap like a child who didn't know what to do next. "I've been so afraid," he admitted. Afraid of pushing too hard. Afraid of hoping. Nora didn't answer. She just listened. "And I think I stopped seeing him for who he is. I only saw what he lost." "That's grief," she said softly. "It doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like distance." Dominic nodded slowly. "You don't have to apologize," she added. "I do." "For what?" He looked down at his hands. "For disappearing." That night, the house felt not louder, not busier, but fuller. Dominic sat at the kitchen island while Ryan told him every detail of his backyard walk, sketchbook open between them, Nora quietly making dinner a few feet away. "She says puddles make you stronger," Ryan said, giggling. Dominic smiled. "Is that so? Because you gotta balance and not slip." "Makes sense." "She said next week I might climb the porch steps. I'm gonna do it, Dad, I swear." Dominic reached over and tousled his son's hair. "I believe you. Ryan's eyes sparkled. That was all he'd wanted to hear. Later, after Ryan had gone to bed and the house was quiet again, Dominic stood at the glass doors, looking out at the cones in the grass. The towel was still crumpled beside them. He heard Nora step into the room behind him. "Do you want me to clean that up before I leave?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Leave it. I like seeing it there." She hesitated. "You sure?" "Yeah." He turned to her. "I meant what I said earlier. Thank you." She nodded, the silence between them calm now. "I've been thinking," Dominic added, "about what you said yesterday, about presence, about belief." He exhaled slowly. "I think I've been arrogant, thinking the best doctors and top-dollar clinics could solve things, but I never asked what he needed. Not really." Nora said nothing at first. Then, "Sometimes what kids need is someone who kneels down and sees the world from their height." He nodded. "It's humbling." "It's supposed to be." Dominic gave a soft laugh. Nora stepped toward the doorway, gathering her things, but before she left, she turned back. "He's proud of you, you know," she said. Dominic blinked. "Ryan?" She nodded. "Even when you couldn't look him in the eyes, he still looked up to you." That hit somewhere deep. Nora gave a small smile, then disappeared down the hall. Dominic turned back to the glass, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was looking at what he'd lost. He was finally seeing what he still had. The next morning, the sky was soft and grey, and the house held a rare kind of quiet, the kind that comes not from silence but from stillness, peace. Dominic waited until Nora had finished tidying the breakfast dishes before speaking. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice lower than usual, not business low, personal low. Nora turned from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. "Of course." "In the garden?" She nodded. They stepped outside into the soft light, the dew still clinging to the grass, and sat, Dominic on the edge of a bench, Nora on the low step beside the planters Ryan had once abandoned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dominic broke the silence. "I've seen what you've done for him, not just physically, but whatever that thing is that makes him light up. And I need to know, how did you learn this? Not just the techniques, the patience, the knowing." Nora sat back slightly. "You want the real story?" "I want all of it." She looked down at her hands for a moment, then folded them in her lap. "Isaiah," she said softly. "My younger brother." Dominic listened. He was born early, cord-wrapped, spent his first 6 weeks in NICU. When he finally came home, the doctors said he might never walk. CP, similar to Ryan. He was 2 when our mom passed. A stroke, sudden. I was 17, still in high school. Dominic's breath caught, but he didn't interrupt. "They wanted to put him in the system," she continued. "Said I was too young to take care of him. But I fought for guardianship, got it. Barely. And then I taught myself what I needed to know." "How?" Dominic asked quietly. "Libraries, YouTube, old physical therapy textbooks from thrift stores. I watched how therapists moved, took notes, asked questions. I couldn't afford a degree yet, so I made one up from scratch." She gave a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. By the time Isaiah was 5, he was taking his first steps, against every prediction. I used kitchen towels, couch cushions, milk jugs, brooms, anything I could find. I made therapy out of survival. Dominic was silent, not from judgment, but awe. "I worked nights at a diner, took classes during the day. Howard University let me in on a scholarship. I graduated top 5%, got licensed, applied everywhere." "And?" Nora shook her head slowly. "You know what happens when you show up to a downtown clinic with a Southside zip code on your resume, and braids you did yourself because you can't afford a salon?" She met his eyes. They smile. They nod. Then they move on. Dominic looked down, ashamed of how familiar that sounded, how easy it was to believe potential only when it wore the right kind of polish. I kept going, she said. Opened a community clinic in DC, small but busy. We saw dozens of kids. Some walked for the first time. Some just learned to trust someone, but then funding dried up. Politics, grants pooled. The clinic closed. I lost my job, and eventually custody of Isaiah. Her voice caught for the first time. I wasn't stable enough, they said. He got placed with an aunt in Texas, still doing well, but I haven't seen him in 2 years. Dominic let the silence linger, let it mean something. You shouldn't have had to do any of that alone, he said finally. Nora shrugged. That's how it is for people like me. You learn early. There's the world you're born into, and then there's the one you have to carve yourself. He studied her for a long moment. The girl with the rolled-up towels and the open hands had once built miracles in the corner of a cramped apartment, while the rest of the world told her no. And now she was doing it again. Here, in his backyard, with his son. That evening, Dominic did something he hadn't done in years. He cooked, or tried to. Nora found him in the kitchen around 6:30, sleeves rolled up, a mess of pasta water and confusion surrounding him. Do you even know what you're doing? She asked, half laughing. No, he said, grinning. But I figured I owed you a meal, at least one. She paused. Is this dinner? Yes, he said. Sit, please. Ryan's helping with garlic bread, which means we're in real trouble. She hesitated, then slowly pulled out a chair. Ryan bounded in a few minutes later, apron askew and face streaked with flour. I told Dad he was going to burn the noodles, he announced. Dominic feigned offense. They're al dente. They're crunchy, Ryan shot back. Nora laughed, the sound light and rare. They sat together at the table, Dominic, Ryan and Nora, for the first time, not as employer and employee, not as therapist and patient, but something messier, something warmer. Something like family. They talked about school, about favorite movies, about how Ryan wanted to build a robot that could fetch snacks. At one point, Ryan turned to Dominic and said, Miss Nora told me once that therapy means healing the whole person, not just the legs. Dominic nodded, eyes meeting Nora's. She's right. Ryan beamed. After dinner, as they cleared the plates, Nora lingered at the sink while Dominic dried. I didn't expect any of this, she said softly. Not the job, not the boy, definitely not the pasta. He smiled. Me neither. You don't have to keep me here, you know, she added. You've seen what I do. You could hire someone more official, flashier credentials. Dominic set the dish towel down. I don't want official. I want you. She turned, surprised. You saw my son when I couldn't. You reminded him what strength feels like. And you reminded me what it looks like to care again. Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. He stepped closer. I don't know what's next, he said. But I know I don't want to go back to what life was before still. You walked into it. Then, after a moment, she whispered, Me either. And for the first time, it felt like the walls between them were no longer made of roles or fear or grief, just shared ground, hard-earned, sacred, real. The next morning, Dominic stood by the doorway of the kitchen, watching Nora cut fruit for Ryan's lunch. Her movements were steady, almost meditative, knife gliding, pieces folded neatly into a small container. She didn't notice him at first. Nora, he said softly. She looked up. Morning. He stepped into the room, still unsure of how to phrase what had been pressing on his mind since dinner the night before. I want to offer you a permanent position, he said, her brow furrowed. I thought I already had one. Not as the maid, he said, as Ryan's therapist. Officially, full-time, with full pay, benefits, everything you'd get at any top clinic. Nora blinked. Dominic continued, This isn't charity, it's recognition of your skill, your impact, and of what I see when I look at my son now. She set the knife down, slowly. I don't know, she said cautiously. People already look at me sideways, being in a white man's house, raising his child. You're not raising my child, Dominic said gently. You're helping him heal. She hesitated, folding her arms. I just don't want anyone thinking this is some pity project, she added, or that I'm being kept here like something that doesn't belong outside these walls. You belong exactly where you choose to be, he said. And if that's here, then I'll make sure the world knows what you are. Not just a therapist, but one of the best. Nora held his gaze for a long time. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but I want a space. A real one. No more puddles and towels. Dominic smiled. Done. Within 2 weeks, the spare guest room overlooking the garden was transformed. Where once there had been beige carpet and dusty lamps, there were now textured mats, resistance bands, a sensory swing, foam blocks, art supplies, light-up balance beams, shelves lined with colourful containers. Nora called it Ryan's room of yes. No walls, she said, no charts, no pity. Just space to say yes to his body, his story, his pace. Ryan was thrilled. The first time he stepped inside, his eyes went wide. This looks like a superhero lab, he whispered. It is, Nora replied, and you're the test pilot. What followed were weeks of transformation, subtle at first, then seismic. Nora introduced sensory play with textured fabrics and weighted blankets. She crafted games that disguised motor skill drills as treasure hunts. She taught Ryan to name how his body felt, not just physically, but emotionally. One day, she placed a mirror in front of him and said, "Tell me one strong thing you see." "My legs," he said without hesitation. Dominic began spending more time in the sessions, quietly at first, just sitting on the floor beside them, listening. Sometimes he'd join the games, chasing foam balls or holding Ryan steady on the wobble board. And slowly, Ryan began to talk, not just to Nora, to Dominic, about things that had once been locked behind silence. His fears, the accident, even his memories of his mother. "She used to braid my hair," he said one afternoon, tracing a line on a sketch of her face. "She called me her little lion." Dominic swallowed the lump in his throat. She did. That night, Dominic found a note on his desk in Ryan's handwriting. "Thanks for listening, Dad." It felt good. School had always been a sore subject. Crowds, stares, eyes that stared too long. But one evening over dinner, Ryan surprised them both. "Miss Nora says I don't have to go back if I'm not ready, but I think I want to try," he said. Dominic looked up from his plate. "You sure?" Ryan nodded. "Only half days. But yeah." "We'll make it work," Dominic said. Nora smiled softly. He's braver than he knows. That weekend, Dominic watched as Nora led Ryan through a confidence coaching exercise. She placed a line of tape down the hallway and asked him to cross it while saying something bold. Ryan hesitated, then whispered, "I'm stronger than people think." "Louder," Nora said. He said it again, clearer, and again, stronger. Dominic caught the moment on video. He didn't post it, didn't share it. He just watched it once more that night after Ryan had gone to sleep, tears streaking down his face in the glow of his phone screen. That same evening, after the lights were off and the house had settled into sleep, Dominic tucked Ryan in and reached to turn off the lamp. But Ryan grabbed his hand gently. "Dad," he whispered. "Yeah?" Ryan looked up at him, eyes soft. "I'm not scared anymore." Dominic froze. He didn't know what to say, so he just leaned forward and kissed his son's forehead. "Me neither," he said quietly. Then he turned off the light, closed the door and stood in the hallway a long while, listening to the sound of his son breathing steady and free in the dark. The expo was held in a sleek glass building near the lakefront. Booths stretched from wall to wall, robotic braces, digital exosuits, state-of-the-art treadmills that monitored every micro-movement. Screens flashed, logos gleamed. Experts in tailored suits stood beside their innovations, ready to sell progress by the square foot. Nora shifted in her seat at the panel table, adjusting the lanyard around her neck. It read, "Guest Demonstrator, Pediatric Movement Therapy." She looked down at her palms. They were dry but tense. She wasn't used to being on this side of the display, on a stage, not in a supply closet. Ryan sat beside her, legs swinging from his chair, crayon in hand, quietly sketching the scene. Dominic stood a few feet behind, arms crossed, watching the crowd gather. "You okay?" he asked softly. Nora gave a tight smile. "I feel like someone's going to ask me what algorithm I used for sidewalk therapy with kitchen towels." Dominic chuckled. "Let them ask." The session began. Other speakers showed clips of cutting-edge interventions, 3D gait mapping, AI-assisted joint tracking. Then it was Nora's turn. She didn't have a slideshow. She had a video. Ryan, barefoot in the backyard, stepping into puddles, balancing on pillows, laughing, walking, and in the background, her voice, steady and warm. The room went quiet. When the clip ended, Nora stood. She didn't speak like the others, with polished jargon or sleek delivery. She spoke from the gut. "I didn't have funding," she said. "I had a boy who wanted to move again. I had towels. I had belief. So I used them." There was silence. Then slow, growing applause. A woman in the front row, a pediatric neurologist, raised her hand. "What you've done is extraordinary," she said. "Do you publish anywhere?" Nora shook her head. "No time. I work." Someone else stood. "Do you train?" "No, but I could." Dominic stepped forward then, taking the mic from the moderator. "If anyone wants to know why my son can walk again, why he can laugh and climb stairs and sleep through the night without nightmares, it's because of her," he said, turning to Nora. "Not tech, not labs, her, Nora King." The applause swelled. Cameras flashed. A few reporters edged closer, scribbling notes. Nora stood still, stunned. She wasn't used to spotlights, but she didn't flinch. She just nodded. Once. Afterward, the three of them slipped away early. The attention was kind, but loud. Nora needed quiet. Ryan needed space. So Dominic drove them south, away from glass towers and clinics, into the neighborhood where Nora had first learned how to heal without a license, a grant, or permission. The streets were familiar to her, in a way no GPS could explain. The sidewalks knew her feet. The corners held stories. They parked in front of a modest brick community center. The sign outside was crooked, but the paint was fresh. Inside, a group of teens were gathered in the gym, playing modified basketball. One of them had a prosthetic leg. Another moved with crutches, but fast and confident. At the edge of the court, a tall young man called out drills. "Left foot, cross, shoot." He turned and saw Nora. "Sis!" Isaiah. He ran over and lifted her in a hug that almost knocked her backward. Nora laughed fully for the first time all week. Dominic watched them, something warm spreading in his chest. "You didn't say he was taller than you now," Dominic joked. "He cheats," Nora said, eyes still on her brother. Isaiah turned to Ryan. "So this is the legend," he said. "My sister's newest miracle." Ryan grinned, stepping forward. "I'm learning stairs." Isaiah held out a fist. "Respect." They bumped knuckles like old friends. Later, they sat on a folding bench outside the gym, watching the teens pack up equipment. "I started helping out here a few months ago," Isaiah said. "They needed someone who knew how to get kids moving without making them feel broken." Dominic looked around. "You built something." Isaiah shrugged. "I'm just continuing what she started." He nodded toward Nora. "She used to make me walk between cereal boxes in the kitchen, told me they were mountains." Dominic smiled. "She made me believe I wasn't less, just different." Nora swallowed, blinking fast. The sun was starting to set, casting soft orange across the blacktop. Dominic looked at her then, really looked, and saw it all laid out in the open. The weight she'd carried, the lives she'd touched, the quiet, relentless force that had lived beneath the surface of every room she'd ever entered. She wasn't just transforming Ryan. She'd been transforming entire corners of the world, quietly, unseen, until now. On the drive home, Ryan dozed in the back seat, a hoodie tucked under his head. The city lights flickered as they merged onto the expressway. Nora stared out the passenger window, arms folded. "You were brilliant today," Dominic said. She gave a tired smile. Still don't know if the world's ready for someone like me. Dominic's voice was firm, but soft. Then we make space. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. Whatever door you want to walk through next, we'll build it together. Outside, the skyline rose like a promise, and inside the car, something settled. Not just hope, but purpose. The auditorium hummed with chatter and restless energy. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, parents fanning themselves with programs, phones ready to capture every shaky performance. It was the annual elementary talent show, paper stars taped across the stage, the words "Shine Bright," painted in bold, cheerful letters. Dominic sat in the third row, his heart thudding in time with the faint thump of his pulse in his ears. His hands wouldn't stay still. Every few seconds, he checked the stage lights, the aisle, the edge of the curtain. He wasn't nervous for the other kids. Ryan. Backstage, Nora crouched beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder. Ryan was dressed in a light blue shirt and khaki pants, simple, but his favorite. His crutches were folded and leaning against the wall. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," she said softly. "You've already proved everything you need to." Ryan looked up at her, calm in a way that was older than his years. "I want to." "Why?" "Because I want everyone to know I'm not scared anymore." Nora smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then you go tell them." He nodded once, determined. The MC called his name. "Next up, Ryan Patterson, 2nd grade." The applause was polite at first, standard parent applause. But as Ryan appeared from behind the curtain, alone, no crutches, walking slowly but deliberately toward the microphone, the sound swelled. The room went silent. You could hear each careful step, each breath. Dominic's throat closed. Ryan stopped center stage, his small hands gripping the edge of the podium for balance. He looked out over the sea of faces. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "My name is Ryan Patterson," he began, "and today I want to talk about my hero." A ripple of curiosity ran through the crowd. "My hero doesn't wear a cape," Ryan continued. "She wears sneakers. She used to mop floors, and she taught me how to stand again." He looked toward the audience, and his eyes found Nora. "She taught me how to fall and laugh, how to walk through puddles without being scared, how to believe that my body isn't broken. It's just learning." A soft gasp escaped from someone in the back row. The teacher beside the stage pressed a hand to her heart. Ryan took a deep breath, his voice growing stronger. "My hero's name is Miss Nora King, and she didn't just teach me how to walk. She taught me how to be brave." Applause broke out, first scattered, then roaring. Nora covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Dominic stood, clapping hard, not caring who saw the tears on his own face. Around him, the entire room was on its feet. Teachers, students, parents, all standing for a 7-year-old boy who had just walked into the world on his own 2 feet. After the show, the hallway filled with noise and movement, children laughing, parents congratulating, cameras flashing. Ryan ran to Nora and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You did it," she whispered, crouching to his level. He grinned. "We did it." Dominic approached, his expression caught between pride and disbelief. "You were incredible, bud." Ryan's face lit up. "Did you cry?" Dominic gave a half laugh, wiping at his cheek. "Maybe a little." Ryan turned to Nora. "You too?" She nodded, smiling through tears. "Definitely." Ryan beamed. "Then I did it right." Later that evening, after the noise had faded and the city's glow pulsed outside the windows, Dominic gathered Nora and Ryan in the living room. The house was quiet, except for the soft clink of glasses, sparkling cider poured by Dominic himself. "To you," he said, lifting his glass toward Ryan, "for every step that got us here." Ryan clinked his cup, grinning. "And to Miss Nora," he added, "for showing me where to put my feet." Dominic smiled. "Actually," he said, turning to Nora, "I have something for her." Nora blinked, confused. "For me?" He walked to the desk, opened a folder, and pulled out a document. The heading read, "The Nora King Foundation for Pediatric Movement and Play Therapy." She froze. Dominic spoke quietly, like he was afraid to break the moment. "I want to build something," he said, "in your name. A foundation, real programs, real funding for kids like Ryan. For families who can't afford specialists or insurance battles or years of waiting lists. You'll run it, lead it, train others to do what you do." Nora stared at the paper, her mouth open, but no words forming. "I can't," she started, shaking her head. "Dominic, this is too much." "It's not enough," he said firmly. "You've changed lives without even trying to. Imagine what you could do if the world finally gave you the tools." Her eyes filled again. She looked from the folder to Ryan, who was watching her with quiet pride. "Miss Nora," he said softly, "now you can teach more kids to fly." That did it. Nora covered her face, shoulders shaking. Dominic stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her back. "This is yours," he said. "All of it. The credit, the name, the legacy. You earned every bit." She looked up at him, voice trembling. "I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," he replied. She took a long breath and nodded. "Yes." A week later, the press release went live. The photo showed Nora standing beside Dominic and Ryan, smiling, the foundation banner behind them. "A new era in pediatric healing," the headline read. The story spread faster than they expected. News outlets, medical journals, even talk shows. But none of that mattered to Nora. What mattered were the letters that started arriving at the house. Parents, teachers, kids, telling her how her story made them believe again. In the evenings, she and Ryan would read them together on the couch. He'd laugh at the drawings, stick figures standing tall, little hearts in the corners. Sometimes Dominic joined them, quiet, content just to watch. The woman he once thought was just the maid now had an office downtown, a team of young therapists she was training, and a growing movement spreading beyond Chicago. Yet when she came back to the Patterson house, she always took her shoes off at the door, walked barefoot through the yard, and checked the puddles after it rained. Because that's where it all began. One night, as the three of them sat on the patio under the soft hum of the garden lights, Ryan leaned his head against Nora's arm. "Miss Nora," he murmured. "Yeah, baby." "When people ask who you are now, what do you say?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "I say, I'm a believer in puddles." Ryan laughed. "That's weird." "It's true," she said. "Every great thing starts with a small step and a little bit of mess." Dominic looked at them both, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. The boy who once couldn't stand, the woman who once wasn't seen, and the man who'd finally learned what it meant to stay. Together, they sat under the night sky, 3 stories rewritten by the same miracle. And somewhere deep inside that stillness, Dominic realized the truth of it all. Sometimes faith doesn't shout. It whispers and walks. 2 years later, the building stood tall on a quiet corner in South Side Chicago. Bright white walls, wide glass doors, a mural stretching across one side painted by local kids, feet, legs, wheels, wings. In bold blue letters above the entrance, it read, "The Nora King Institute for Movement, Play Possibility." Inside, the halls buzzed with life. Children's laughter, parents' voices, the quiet rhythm of hope in motion. But outside on this bright fall morning, the crowd had gathered for something more. The grand opening of the second therapy center, a community space, funded entirely by the Patterson family, built where Nora had once walked her little brother across cracked sidewalks between makeshift therapy drills. Now she stood between the 2 people who had changed her life as much as she'd changed theirs, Dominic and Ryan. Ryan was 9 now, taller, stronger, more himself. He wore a navy blazer, no crutches. His walk was confident, still deliberate but full of ease. A press badge hung from his neck. Junior ambassador. He beamed at the reporters, shook hands with donors, and answered questions about therapy with the clarity of someone who had lived every moment of it. "Miss Nora says play is a kind of medicine," he explained to a local TV crew. "And medicine works better when you laugh." Nora stood back, arms crossed, watching him with pride that barely fit in her chest. Dominic, beside her, had grown softer around the edges. He still ran his company, though less often from the corner office, and more from a phone tucked into his back pocket, while walking the garden or helping with after-school homework. He looked at Nora now, that familiar warmth in his voice. "You ready for this?" She smiled. "Been ready for years. Just had to believe it was possible." He nodded. "And now you're building it from scratch." "No," she said gently. "We built it." The ribbon fluttered in the breeze, yellow and bright. The crowd quieted as Ryan stepped to the front, a pair of small scissors in one hand, his parents, because that's what they were now in every way that mattered, on either side of him. He looked up at the audience, then at Nora. "I used to think my legs were broken," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Turns out all I needed was someone who saw me standing." Gasps and applause filled the air. Nora's hand trembled as Ryan reached for hers. "Ready," he whispered. She nodded, tears in her eyes. He turned to Dominic, who bent low to meet his eyes. "Cut it, champ." With one clean motion, Ryan snipped the ribbon. Flashbulbs burst. The crowd erupted. And just like that, the doors opened. Not just to a building, but to something much bigger. The ceremony spilled into the afternoon. Inside, children explored the new therapy rooms, walls painted with colors that spark movement, not fear. There were balance swings, obstacle paths, sensory gardens, art stations, music corners. No whitecoats, no judgment, just joy. Nora gave a brief tour to a group of visiting physicians, explaining the core of her model. "Play, permission, and presence," she said. "Every session starts with what the child chooses. We listen to the body. We celebrate every wobble." "And what about data?" a skeptical doctor asked. She smiled. "We keep it, but we also keep their drawings." Ryan joined them mid-tour, proudly showing off his favorite spot, a wall of handprints. Every child who had completed a full therapy journey here added theirs in bright paint. "Mine's gold," he said, "because Miss Nora said I'm the first kid to come full circle." The doctor looked up. "And how are you now?" Ryan grinned. "I run. I help. I teach other kids how not to fall." Nora rested a hand on his shoulder. "He reminds us why we do what we do." As the sun began to set, the crowd thinned, and the three of them found themselves back outside, standing beneath the mural, watching the light shift across it. Dominic exhaled. "Feels like the ending of something." Nora shook her head. "No. This is a beginning." Ryan looked up at both of them. "Can we stay a little longer?" "Of course," Dominic said. "This is yours too."